Thank you for joining us tonight on the Capitol Report on NTD Television, where we bring you all of the latest news directly from our nation's capital. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. A major snowstorm in the metro D.C. area brought up to 10 inches of snow, shutting down the federal government and local schools. And President Biden met with farmers and ranchers to discuss rising costs of meat and other agricultural products. With inflation here and stagflation on the horizon, we have former Associate Director for Economic Policy in the Trump administration, Vance Ginn, to break it all down. As senators head back to Capitol Hill today, passing voting rights reform is a top priority. Democrats are eyeballing a change to the rules so they can pass it alone with no Republican votes. But is it likely to be successful? The nation's capital did not have a white Christmas, but today the region is covered in snow. A major snowstorm Monday morning shut down the government and local schools. The D.C. region got between 5 and 10 inches of snow. This, combined with freezing temperatures and high winds, is causing some power outages. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser declared a snow emergency.
I can't emphasize enough right now that you should stay home, stay off the roads, allow our crews to work, and protect yourselves.
Virginia State Police also urged residents to stay home and allow for plows to clear the roads. Car accidents left over 100 vehicles disabled in Virginia. A collision between two big trucks on Interstate 97 blocked traffic, leaving hundreds of Maryland drivers stranded. The first storm of the year brought snow to multiple states in the Northeast and left hundreds of thousands in the Carolinas, Georgia, and Tennessee without power. The deep, wet snow makes shoveling difficult, but for Washingtonians who do not have to go out, this is a beautiful storm to watch. And for many children, an exciting way to start the year. DC's snow emergency is extended until 4 a.m. on Tuesday. The Biden administration is going to dedicate $1 billion from the American Rescue Plan to expand independent meat processing capacity. It's part of a plan to curb rising prices for meat and poultry. In a virtual meeting Monday with farmers and ranchers from around the country, President Biden talked about his plan to increase competition and bring down the prices in the meat industry.
The meat industry is a textbook example on the price side. 4 big corporations control more than half of the markets in beef, pork, and poultry.
He blamed those conglomerates as middlemen that have led to rising prices for consumers and dwindling profits for farmers and ranchers.
Our farmers and ranchers have to pay whatever these 4 big companies say they have to pay, by and large. But that's only half of it. These companies can use their position as middlemen to overcharge grocery stores and ultimately families.
Biden says that there are 4 parts to his action plan.
First, we're going to invest $1 billion in new and expanded meat and poultry processing capacity, funding that was included in the American Rescue Plan to revive our economy.
Biden's plan also includes $100 million for workforce training and safety. Moreover, it's trying to strengthen rules that require farmers and ranchers to get a fair price for the meat that they provide. The White House meeting occurred as high inflation has thwarted Biden's economic agenda and hurt his public approval. Consumer prices in November rose nearly 7% over the past 12 months at a 39-year high. High meat prices is a major contributor, which has climbed 16% from just a year ago. Vance Ginn is chief economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He was also associate director for economic policy at OMB during the Trump administration. Vance, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Now, Vance, President Biden met with farmers and ranchers today to discuss an executive order he signed back in July to make the agriculture sector more competitive, where he says that higher prices that we're seeing on meat and other agricultural products are due to lack of competition. Is this the main reason Americans are paying more at the grocery store, or is it possible that inflation might be playing a role as well?
Well, it seems like they're willing to blame anything else other than the bad policies out of Washington for what we see. I mean, we have massive inflation across the United States. The Consumer Price Index is measured year over year at 6.8%, which is the highest that we've seen in nearly 40 years. A whole generation hasn't seen this type of inflation. And so inflation tends to pop up from different places across the economy, and one of those is being meat. Now, sure, some specific prices for goods and services will be impacted by the market fundamentals, labor shortages, increased demand, things of that nature. But overall, what this boils down to is Congress spending too much money, running up massive debt, which gives the Federal Reserve, our central bank, ammunition to print more money. So what we see is too much money chasing too few goods, which is the classic example of inflation. And so while they might want to blame these monopoly situations and other things throughout the economy, it's really just a blame game. Ultimately, it's the bad policies out of Washington.
Vance, I want to get your thoughts on the overall state of the economy with the holidays behind us and the focus shifting away from the shopping season. Where is the economy now, and what is the outlook?
Well, during the last year, we've seen the unemployment rate drop pretty substantially. We're down to almost 4%. I think we're 4.2% for the nation. So that would indicate full employment, where everybody who wants a job basically can have one. The problem is that we still have a number of people that are unemployed and a number of people who have dropped out of the labor force over this period of time for a number of reasons. Some of that could be they're worried about the COVID situation. Others are that they're worried about getting the vaccine and that there are mandates that are in place by businesses or by governments. They've chosen not to work. And so that is a concern for me moving forward and where we're at currently in the economic situation. Now, we have high inflation, slowing economic growth, and in economic terms, what we've called that is stagflation. Could we be in a period of stagflation? It seems to be that way. And if we continue to have massive amount of money being printed and deficits being run by Congress, we will continue to have slower economic growth and fewer jobs that are being created and more inflation, which is a classic example, again, of stagflation. So this is a period of time where I'm concerned about the economy. Even though we have some good indicators, we've got to look underneath those. What are the underlying fundamentals of the economy? And they are still weak.
Now, I just want to ask you, you mentioned stagflation. Can you just kind of simplify this and also explain what exactly it is and what drives stagflation?
Stagflation is really where you have high amount of price increases across the economy, high inflation, and you also have slow economic growth. And that was what we saw during the 1970s, where we had the period that's called the Great Inflation, which we really had stagflation. The bad Carter years and the bad policies that were coming out of Washington, we don't want to get into that situation again. And unfortunately, President Biden seems to be taking pages out of the playbook of President Carter whenever you're trying to increase the size and scope of government, spend too much money, overregulate things, and then that drives less economic growth and higher unemployment and higher inflation in the process.
You mentioned the mandates a moment ago. Some people are saying that the fact that the Biden administration has not implemented another federal shutdown, especially based on the way Omicron has been spreading and some of the measures that have already been taken, that it's an indicator of how fragile the economy truly is. Some economists have suggested the Biden administration seems to know that the result of another shutdown would be catastrophic to the economy. How do you see it, and do you think that the economy could sustain being shut down again?
Well, I think if you look at the data and the evidence from what happened during the shutdowns is that they didn't work to reduce the spread, to reduce the number of deaths and hospitalizations. But what it did do was kill a number of small businesses. It killed a lot of jobs that were out there. And so at a time whenever lives were being hurt, we were also influencing, or they were influencing, livelihoods. And so we can't turn back to the shutdown mistakes of the past. We've got to figure out how to do this in a more responsible way for personal responsibility, targeting resources to where they need to be most, and really understanding how the spread happens. And so we've learned a lot over the almost 2 years since the pandemic started. And what we have learned is that we should not make those mistakes that we made in the past. And if we go down that route, I think it would be catastrophic for the economy, for many businesses that are just now getting back online again. And I think what we should do instead is find a way for people to overcome these obstacles on their own, and the government being, last resort overall. And to President Biden's credit here recently, he said, look, there is not a federal solution to COVID. And I believe that's the case. This should be up to the states and for people, because the federal government should not play a role.
Vance Ginn, thank you.
Thank you.
And the FDA today authorized the Pfizer vaccine booster for 12 to 15-year-olds. The agency bypassed its expert vaccine advisory panel again. The FDA also reduced the waiting time between a second dose and a booster from 6 months down to 5. Reviewers studied data from 6,300 Israeli children who have received the booster. As one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, Israel is offering the 4th shot to people over 60 years of age. The country now is seeing the highest daily cases since September. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin Sunday tested positive for the CCP virus. He plans to quarantine at home for 5 days and will join key meetings virtually. The 68-year-old secretary is fully vaccinated and has received a booster. In a statement, he reinstated that the vaccine will, quote, will remain a military medical requirement for our workforce. The Air Force was the first to announce dismissals over the vaccine mandate. The United States Marine Corps has discharged over 200 troops, and the Army said it will begin discharge proceedings in the new year. And Congress's top doctor is urging lawmakers to transition to telework due to the surging number of CCP virus cases at the Capitol. The doctor said that these are mostly breakthrough infections of people who have already been vaccinated, and he's urging congressional offices to avoid in-person meetings as much as possible. And the Senate is back in D.C. this week, kicking off 2022 with a lengthy agenda. A top priority is voting rights reform. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer today said he'd force a vote on changing the Senate rules if Republicans block the voting rights bill. President Biden supports changing the rules too, but are all Democrats on board with this? NTD's Melina Wisecup reports for us.
As senators make their way back to Capitol Hill this week, 2 major votes are on the agenda: Biden's massive spending bill and voting rights reform. Senate Leader Schumer has pledged to hold a vote on both of these, although it's unlikely that either of them will pass. As for voting rights reform, this is something that all 50 Democrats do support, but it's likely to face pushback and blockage from Republicans. In order to overcome this challenge posed by Republicans, Democrats want to change the Senate rules so they can pass it alone. Senate Leader Schumer today announcing that he plans to hold this vote on the rules change by mid-January. In his letter to colleagues, Schumer says the rules change may be necessary to protect the foundation of our democracy, free and fair elections. Highlighting the upcoming anniversary of January 6th, Schumer argues that if voting reform is not passed, it would turn the chaotic day into the new norm. The Freedom to Vote Act Democrats are trying to pass aims to make voting easier through a number of requirements for states, such as expanding early voting, making Election Day a federal holiday, and prohibiting lines longer than 30 minutes, and requiring that all states allow mail-in ballots without voters needing to give a reason to vote by mail. It would create a national standard for voter ID, making the ID requirement more flexible. But states do not have to require voter ID, even for mailed ballots. The bill also addresses campaign funds. Any entity spending over $10,000 in an election would have to disclose all of its major donors.
So, Melina, is it likely that the Senate will change the rules so that they can pass a voting rights bill now?
Well, Steve, President Biden has said he does support this rules change, but it's unclear if it will actually pass. That's because 2 senators, that is Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin, have supported the 60-vote filibuster, and they do support passing this voting rights bill, but they just are skeptical of changing the rules in order to get it done. Now, what this carve-out would do is it would make an exception only for voting rights legislation, so that can pass with just 51 votes in the Senate. Now, negotiations on this are still ongoing, but it looks like with this latest announcement from Senate Leader Schumer that he's planning to push ahead and pressure these 2 senators, hopefully to fall in line. Steve?
Thanks for that, Melina. And coming up, the 2022 midterm elections are coming, and a handful of Democratic senators face what could be a tough midterm battle. And Twitter permanently suspends the personal account of Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. The social media site said that she was posting false information relating to the CCP virus pandemic. With Martin Luther King Day coming in just a couple of weeks, we take a closer look at Dr. King's memorial in Washington, D.C. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. Senators on both sides of the aisle are preparing for a tough midterm battle this year. With the Democrats' razor-thin majority in the Senate, the outcome of this year's elections have even greater implications. NTD's Jessica Beatty takes a look at the Democratic seats that could go either way this year.
A handful of Democratic senators face what could be tough midterm battles this year. Right now, Senate Democrats hold the thinnest possible majority, 50 seats. If Republicans pick up only one more seat, they'll be able to stop almost any Democratic proposal. According to Epoch Times congressional reporter Joseph Lord, 5 Democratic seats in the Senate are highly vulnerable, including New Hampshire Senator Maggie Hassan. In 2016, she beat her Republican challenger by just over 1,000 votes. A poll conducted by the University of New Hampshire shows that both of Hassan's expected Republican rivals this year are statistically tied with her. The study was published in February. Also vulnerable is Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock. In 2020, he narrowly beat Republican Kelly Loeffler, which some considered an unexpected loss, but Georgia remains significantly conservative and Republican. Lord's analysis says the GOP has a good chance of winning the seat this year. Over in Arizona, Senator Mark Kelly narrowly won a special election to fill the late Senator John McCain's seat in 2020. And this year's race will likely be close too. Compared to the politics of the state's other Democratic senator, Kyrsten Sinema, some Arizonans may see Kelly as too liberal for the purple state. Also in play for both sides is Senator Catherine Cortez Masto's seat in the swing state of Nevada. She narrowly won in 2016, but unlike Georgia and Arizona, Nevada's state legislature has a Democrat majority, and the state's recent track record is notably blue-leaning. The last major opportunity for Republicans in 2022 is Colorado Senator Michael Bennet's seat. Like Nevada, Colorado has leaned blue over the past few election cycles. Lord says some are speculating that former Republican Senator Cory Gardner may run against Bennett. Gardner was a senator for over 5 years before Democratic Senator John Hickenlooper won the seat in 2020. If Gardner runs, he could pose a significant challenge to Bennett this year. Jessica Beatty, NTD News.
Former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid will lie in state at the Capitol Rotunda on January 12th. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a joint statement that due to the CCP virus pandemic, the ceremony honoring Reid will only be opened to invited guests. And Twitter has permanently suspended the personal account of Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. The social media site claims she was posting false information relating to the CCP virus pandemic. It's not clear which of the Republican Congresswoman's posts led to her suspension on January 2nd. And Twitter didn't elaborate on the alleged misinformation they said Greene posted. Greene's House of Representatives account is still online. Greene responded to Twitter's suspension on social media platform Getter. She posted that Twitter lets politicians in America and abroad threaten violence and keep their accounts, but she can't cite statistics about adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccinations without getting banned. She also posted that social media platforms and others can't stop the truth from getting out. Greene's ban suggests that Twitter is taking a more hardline stance against users who post COVID-19 or vaccine information that Twitter deems misleading. And Twitter has also suspended Dr. Robert Malone's account. Dr. Malone is a contributor to mRNA vaccine technology. Throughout the pandemic, Malone has been a critic of mandatory COVID-19 vaccination rules as well as mitigation policies. On Twitter, he has amassed more than 500,000 followers before his account was suspended. Former Vice President Mike Pence announced on Monday that his advocacy group has filed an amicus brief urging the United States Supreme Court to reject the Biden administration's vaccine mandate and mandatory testing for businesses with over 100 workers. The group, named Advancing American Freedom, is arguing that the mandate is unconstitutional, and by imposing the mandatory vaccinations and testing, OSHA is exceeding its authority granted by Congress. The brief gives previous examples of OSHA's temporarily imposed standards, which were limited to regulating workplace dangers like asbestos or other chemicals that threatened workers' safety, and not requiring employees to get vaccinated or get some other medical treatment. Mike Pence said in a statement that America is about freedom and the ability to make the best decision for your family or business. His statement said that the vaccine mandate is, quote, not the American way. The chief of the U.S. Capitol Police has admitted that they are understaffed and struggling to acquire new hires. Chief J. Thomas Manger told Fox News Sunday that the Capitol Police is about 400 officers short of where they need to be. While the Capitol Police has undergone several reforms since January 6th, the number of officers falls short of Congress's needs. The shortage comes at a time of increased threats to Congress. Manger said that more than 130 officers have retired or resigned since the events that took place on January 6th, and that the National Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy suspended classes in 2020, making replenishing the police staff harder. With January upon us, the country will soon be celebrating Martin Luther King Day. Before the day comes, let's take a look at Dr. King's memorial in Washington, D.C. Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. In West Potomac Park, downtown Washington, D.C., the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial emerges. It honors this prominent civil rights leader's legacy and his nonviolent philosophy striving for freedom, justice, and equality. It is also the first to honor an African-American individual on the National Mall.
He was a very brave and kind person who fought for equal rights for everybody.
We haven't viewed all of the stonework and the sayings on the stonework, but very inspiring.
Authorized by Congress in 1996, Dr. King's memorial in D.C. was officially dedicated on August 28, 2011. But due to Hurricane Irene, the ceremony was postponed until October 16th. President Barack Obama delivered the remarks.
Basically bring everybody together and try to get rid of the whole black versus white narrative for people. It's just amazing what he represents for the black community.
Built alongside the tidal basin, the memorial is on the line between the Thomas Jefferson and Lincoln memorials, symbolizing the connection of these three great leaders. In his speech, I Have a Dream, Dr. King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and referenced the Declaration of Independence, penned by Thomas Jefferson. The three memorials also form a perfect reflection of America's core values in history, from promising that all men are created equal to the freeing of the slaves and the final push for full and equal rights. That's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.